Okay, I've started the recording. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. All right. So anyway, I'm just going to quickly go over this PDF. But I meant to show this yesterday and I didn't have it pulled up, and in my absent-mindedness completely forgot. So quickly, plan elevation section. So this is a set of quick diagrams from Frank Ching's book. Building Construction Illustrated and Form, Space, and Order. But this basically sort of tells a story here. Let's take a typical sort of what looks like a two-story home or something from the Midwest or East. But again, when we talk about orthographic views, what we're talking about is looking straight down or straight from the side, straight from the front or one of the sides, etc., in a measured way. So everything is to scale. And there's conventions for this. So for instance, plans are looking from top down. Elevations are looking at a building from one or all of its sides, right? So the front elevation would look like, see if I can get my cursor to show up a little better. There. Down here, elevations, the front elevation would look like this, the side elevation would look like that. Everything's measured into scale. So you draw things accordingly, right? But they're orthographic. In other words, everything's sort of flat. Um, and you're describing a three-dimensional object from a variety of ortho views. Okay, so we can turn that floor plan and then project up to create an axon or a plan oblique. Again, we can always uh, uh, slice the elevation open, like you have this front elevation down here. We can slice it open and then create a sort of section, right? They call this a section elevation. I don't understand why. It's simply a building section where you can see the foundation, the floors, the walls, everything that's being cut through. Beyond, you do see elevation information beyond, right? So anything that you would see beyond that section cut, edges and windows and things like that are typically drawn, right? And what's really key here, you can see, right? When we're cutting things, either in plan or in section, we do sort of beef up the line weights around the things that are being cut. And then oftentimes we'll add a hatch or a poche or a fill because hierarchically we want to sort of see what's being cut through. Plans and sections are very good at that sort of figure ground relationship where we see what's solid mass and what's space in between these planes or volumes, right? So with that relationship in mind, we always use the tools in our tool set to create visual emphasis around the things that are actually being cut through walls and floors and ground and ceilings, etc. Okay. Interestingly, let me just zoom in here. Right? You can see, right, when we cut that oblique, you can see that we're going 4 feet up from the floor and we're cutting through walls, and then we have a window, and oftentimes the window isn't being cut through, or at least the wall isn't being cut through at the window. And so what we do is we show the sill of the window and elevation beyond, and then we add a line or a double line for that glazing, that glass that's actually being cut through, right? And if it's a curtain wall, we would show mullions also being cut through. For a structure, if we don't have walls, but we have columns, like out here on the porch, right? Those are being cut through as well. So those would have a different line weight and then actually be filled in as well. Okay. Here we have what looks like a chimney or some sort of a fireplace, and the flue going up. It's being cut, and you can see that again. You can see the hearth just in elevation below, right? And of course, we also can show stairs and elevation below, right? Here's the sort of stoop with the staircase going down. Here's a staircase going up from the first floor up to the second floor. And at the 4-foot level, we sort of add a little cut mark and then discontinue the staircase, right? Letting us know that that stair is going upwards and that it gets cut at 4 feet in the plan and that it would continue up to the second floor. So starting to sort of talk a little more about conventions here. What we see. What else? We're seeing an elevation, just the sort of edge of the porch, right? So you can see this edge. It's not being cut through, so there's nothing being shaded in here, right? Same with the floor. see if I can, there we go. All right, here's another example. And oftentimes we will align our drawings similarly to this, right? We try to make that connection horizontally or vertically between the drawings, right? So all of these are orthographic projections. Some are being cut in plan or in section. But we understand that there's like a sort of implied, let me just get my annotate tools out here so you can see my cursor a little better. There's like an implied hinge right here between the front elevation and the side elevation, right? Then we can turn it also this way and then cut it and get a section. And each time everything's to the same scale and everything's aligned. You can see that the ground is aligned through a datum, right? So we can see these relationships. They become very, very clear, right? Even the windows line up, right? Here's the bottom sill and the bottom sill. I can't draw very straight lines with my mouse, but and then also from sections and elevations down to plans, right? So you can see again how all these things sort of line up, right? Oftentimes we do, we sort of line these things up again. And in fact, I don't even mind. Used to be in the good old days when we were doing this on trace paper or Mylar, you would see occasionally some of our light construction lines and projection lines going through, right? I don't mind seeing those to imply them anyway. And then we've already talked about the isometric and axonometrics, right? This idea that you can do in this case, a 30-30 isometric. I think this one's probably a 45-45. There's different types, right? Depending on what you think sort of tells the story the best. But both of these are to scale. In other words, the elevation is drawn to scale. It just happens to be that it's skewed along the sort of 30-degree axis here, or the 45-degree axis. Right. Let me clear that out. I have to close this now. Okay, there we go. Right. So here's a really famous one. Famous section plan from I can't remember, 18th, 19th century. So you can see this is actually a prison. So you can see the rooms here. So this is an elevation. Halfway through, they decide to cut it because it's a sort of symmetrical circular plan. They cut it and show the section, and then they project down and show half of the plan, right? So you can see that there's a little bit of artistic license here. But basically, if you have this half of the plan, you have the other half of the plan, you just mirror it. And it's the same thing. If you have this half of the section, you can mirror it to see the other half. If you have this half of the elevation, you can mirror it to see the other half. So a nice compact sort of composite drawing here, combining elevation, section, and plan. Here we go. Here's a cathedral. Again, this is a section. A couple of things to point out here and to sort of maybe hopefully notice, right? Again, everything that's being cut through is pochade and filled in, right? We see a lot of detail and ornament and elevation beyond, right? But all the floors and all the sort of structure that's actually being cut through, and the ground included, right, is pochade, filled in, etc. So what's interesting here is that you start to see things in elevation. In this case, they've added some detail inside, so you can start to understand the volumes on the inside. You also start to see important things like where you have circulation sort of moving up in a spiral staircase here, a spiral stair here. You start to understand the sort of organizational logic, right? I mean, you have a place where you enter in towers. You have the long part, then you have the sort of crescendo at the end, right? What's interesting is that this is probably typically some sort of cruciform shape. Right here where the two wings sort of come together and intersect, that's the very special place here with the dome. Then you usually have something marking the entrances here and you cap the ends, right? So that's a pretty prototypical cathedral archetype. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to go fast here because I want to show you things. Ah, We talked about Le Corbusier in studio yesterday afternoon. This is Villa Savoye, his most famous piece of architecture. It's a one family home. But here's the idea, right? A sort of house is a machine for living in. You sort of make it a box, make it very simple, lift it up off the ground, put it on columns or pilotis, is what he used to call them. Um, and so you enter on the ground floor, but then you move up into the house. So you raise the house above the ground, you lift it up from the profane, um, urban or natural environment, I guess. And there's some more sculptural things on the roof, ribbon windows, right? And then a simple set of partitions. The spaces really just sort of flow together. There's not a set of rooms. It's not really carved up into lots of four-walled rooms with door openings and things like that. But let's take a look, right? Here we have elevations, right? It's not uncommon maybe to sort of give some sort of indication that some of these walls on the first on the ground floor are actually curved. I'm not quite pleased with how the draftsperson did this one, but just to sort of show you that. But again, we're talking about design, in particular, some of the things that help you design things, but also to communicate the idea, right? Very different than, let's say, the sections and plans that you might find in construction documents, right? So I think it's important to sort of say that oftentimes these things, you start to add things like textures and tones, materials. You start to add scaled humans like silhouettes, etc. You can begin to add things like, hey, this here, let me just annotate this. That, we have this large window and that it's actually framing quite a lovely view of the urban fabric around it, or we have this pushed out this balcony or pushed in the rest of the massing to create this balcony again to sort of appreciate a vantage point, something else, right? So there's some abstract artistic license here in trying to sort of really describe this idea. And you can even see that there's a little bit of the context around very lightly grayed out just to give you a sense of what's around. But again, this isn't photorealism. This is more of a collage, right? However, it's giving you a lot of more indications and ambiance of what's actually happening on the inside, right? So we start to understand that, wow, this is really quite a tall space. This is a very tall window, and that they're actually creating a set of louvers to shade and then sort of scatter the light in through. But that this is a huge space, right? Imagine being a person down here, up here, looking down this way and saying, hey, over there, whatever. So you can begin to sort of see a volumetric and spatial variety, right? That's what a good section does. It really sort of shows you some of the more interesting things inside of a building at any given time. Let's see. Ironically, Kayla and Melanie, they're the ones I'm doing this for, and they keep having to drop out. I think their connection is kind of screwy. All right, so I'm just go ahead and clear all this, but I'm recording this, so hopefully it has some lasting value. This is an interesting one. This was a proposal at one point for part of Manhattan. This was part of, the idea of putting a freeway through Manhattan instead of around it, or this idea that it would go through the Village and Midtown was part of what um, sort of caused a huge uproar, right? Can you imagine sort of taking a city like Manhattan and then sort of like bulldozing so much and putting this in? But this is the idea, right? Then to sort of put the highway underneath and then to sort of create architecture on top. Anyway, I think it's just an interesting drawing type. I think it was by Rudolph or Breuer, I can't remember, one of those late modernists. But this idea that you can sort of take something like a perspective and then cut it in section, or take a section and then project back in perspective. We talked a little bit about this in studio, yesterday, but this idea of section perspective could be a really interesting one. And I'll show in my demonstration today how you can do that in Revit. And of course, it's easy enough to do that in Rhino. So I'll go through the instructions step by step with you guys for the assignment today in the recording, so you have it to refer back to later. But you can see that, these drawing types, they go back way back, right? 20th century, 19th century, 18th century. The perspective was actually created in the Renaissance. Accurate perspective constructions were invented by Brunelleschi. Ironically, when he was doing the Duomo in Florence, Italy. So Santa Maria del Fiore in Florence, if you've ever been to Italy. Let's see. Again, here's another. So let's see. And again, as a reminder, this is being recorded, so if you need to refer back to it, feel free. But again, another section example. What's interesting here is that you can see that they've beefed up everything that's being cut with that sort of black poche. The ground is actually a lighter gray, but they've actually added a lot of tone and materiality to this. And not in a photorealistic way. It's more of a collage, right? Again, showing the kind of space that you have here, the kind of space that you have tucked away back underneath it over here, the kind of space that you have sort of wrapping around with circulation going up and down, etc. Right? And so again, you can start to add things like tone, or maybe a little bit of entourage, some humans or lamps, furniture, etc. If you want. Here we go. Speaking of the Florence Duomo. All right, so again, section perspective, right? These can be really handy. Look at this section, right? This is by Louis Suramaki Lewis, or LTL Architects. They do some very fantastic design work, but they do these lovely section perspectives. I mean, that's what they're known for. They actually wrote a book called The Manual of Section, all section drawings of famous architecture. I can't remember if it was MIT Press or Princeton Architectural Press, but one of those two. And for sure we have it in our library if you ever want to check it out, or check out LTL's work. They have a website, LTL, like the letters LTL Architects. You can see a lot of their work, but they rely on sections and how they sort of stack and shift program around in section in interesting ways, right? So you start to see, again, a section can tell a story that a plan or maybe just a simple perspective can't, right? But this idea that we have the urban fabric and we take it and we just start to step it up in an amphitheater. At the same time, we can tuck some sort of cafe or commissary underneath. And this idea that this edge just sort of peels upwards and peels up and over, and you create a public space, and you basically bring the street up into the building, upwards and in. This idea that then there's a cantilever over here, that we've stacked parking down below, that we've stacked more program on top of the parking, etc. Right? So you can start to see a much more interesting picture here in the section than a plan could ever really show you in one snapshot. It'd take a lot of time to sort of figure out how things line up in plan and put this picture together in your head. Here becomes quite evident, right? So sections are really important, particularly as you have more spatial complexity. It's interesting, right? Where the building gets really deep. I mean, look, you can see over here on the periphery, we have windows to allow light in. But here where it gets really deep, what they've done is they carved out a light well that goes all the way even down to the parking garage, which is open air. And so now suddenly you have spaces that actually have a little bit of borrowed daylight and things like that. You can start to see where circulation is, how that begins to work oftentimes in a section, or where the core is and how everything relates to it. Right. Another example of an LTL section perspective, right? They don't steer away from trying to describe really complex things with these things and making really lovely drawings. So this is like a building that sort of merges with infrastructure. There's actually a lot of things going on here, but there's like sort of viaducts and things like that underneath for traffic. The traffic is in sort of double decker, so more traffic on top. And you can see that they're starting to stack program on top, then adding park and public space on top of the program, and then lifting things up on stilts with a couple of cores, and adding more architecture on even on top of that hovers over. Really bizarre and interesting. And again, you look at this and go, I want to see more of this. Now I can start to look at the plans and set more sections and perspectives and try to get into this project. Another one, right? You can see again, it's this sort of interesting stacking, not nothing too complex here when you start to look at it actually. But look at this, there's sort of an A-B relationship here. A meaning car parking and B meaning sort of human spaces, A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, A, B, all the way up. And then occasionally pulling some of these spaces away to create some double or triple height spaces um, for some atriums. But then again, sort of connecting these two buildings with a spine down the center, and then being expressive with catwalks and things like that that connect them up in different places. Apparently for some sort of Target shopping center, it looks like over here. All right, so we talked about this one yesterday when we were talking about light and architecture, the Pantheon in Rome. This is a very famous section. Look at this though. The reason I included this is that in this case, it sort of takes the rules and bends them, flips them around, right? The things that are being cut aren't post shade, they're actually left clear, right? Because the inside with all of that detail and the sort of volume, that sort of round circular volume of the dome and the cylindrical volume down at the ground level, at eye level, at street level, those are all articulated with lots of tone and line work, right? So suddenly, in order to stand out from that, right, you instead of adding poche, you do the opposite. And then suddenly you can really sort of see what's being cut versus what's elevation beyond, right? So you can play around with these rules, and there's lots of examples of flipping this rule around, where you really articulate the inside, the volumes inside. And then what you do is instead of shading in really dark the section, you leave it as the sort of negative space, right? All right. Here's another example of a section perspective, again, showing again how these things, how the sort of building works, right? The sort of street coming under this facade and actually going right into the building. Here's an entrance. You can see that there's a lobby, there's a grand staircase, but then there's probably some other things here. There's another grand staircase and a mezzanine over a large work area. Then there's some private sort of offices or meeting rooms up here, etc. Right? So you can begin to see the relationship between what's on the ground floor, what's on up above, where you start to create multi-story spaces versus sort of stack layer cake. And then you can also sort of understand the volumes behind some of the facade and envelope decisions here, like this sort of folded facade that wraps around, or this facade over here that's more descript. All right, here's a typical street section, a section perspective, right? Oftentimes we'll do this if we're trying to describe, let's say, an urban design. We could easily do one of these for, let's say, Fremont Street, right? East Fremont Street, when we show the signage and the boulevards in the center, et cetera, right? But it's all about sort of delineating, in this case, a nice urban streetscape, right? So sections and plans and elevations, when done really cleverly, can really paint a vivid picture. Here's another example of a street section, not a section perspective, just a section. You can see this person was just using some ink and then some, looks like maybe some watercolor or marker, to just to sort of give a little bit of color here and there, right? Nice little tree canopy here. That's what Las Vegas needs, more tree canopies. All right, a plan, right? So this is a typical floor plan. What you can see here is that we have our sort of property line, and then we're sort of working within this, showing the new building. Everything else, all these neighbors, these are more of just the footprint, sort of almost like a roof plan of them, but very simple and just sort of shaded in with a little bit of hatching around the edges. You can see that we're showing trees, we're showing property lines, we're showing everything on the ground in elevation beyond that plan cuts, right? And it's the same thing on the inside, right? Sometimes we even show the finishing on the floors, let's say the joints between tile or you know, something like that, right? But we typically will show furniture. And that gives a sense of scale, it gives a sense of how these spaces might be laid out, and shows again where you would actually have built-ins like counters, islands, cabinets, other sort of casework and plumbing, fixtures, sinks, commodes, water closets, sinks. I just said sinks, baths, etc. All right, so not to belabor this too much. Again, we can zoom out. You can see examples of this. These are this is the Parthenon, sort of the temple complex over Athens, right? You can see that again when you read these, right? Look at all those columns. Those are columns being cut in plan, right? Then we have some walls being cut in plan. And then we see a bunch of other sort of site work like stairs and steps and ramping and things like that in elevation beyond. Okay. Right. Nothing stopping you from adding textures and tones on the outside versus the inside, right? It's really kind of easier now to read this plan, what's interior space, because it's not nearly as articulated as some of the outdoor spaces. So if we were talking about, this is a courtyard house and really the idea here is the garden that the house sort of wraps around. And then how you enter right here underneath the house or something like that, then maybe you start to further articulate these sort of landscape spaces and plan. I'll just sort of skip through these things. Here's the Barcelona Pavilion by Mies van der Rohe. This is the floor plan. Not a very, I would say, very easily read one. But this is, another famous example of modernism, sort of taking a set of planes and defining spaces as rooms with planes, not necessarily just sort of breaking this thing up into a series of boxes and then trying to figure out how to make openings through walls. This is more of, let's make one big open space, and how do we begin to just selectively and strategically add partitions out of marble in order to sort of delineate certain spaces from the other. So you can see, we have a set of vertical walls, and then we have a set of infill glass in between in some cases. Or this, right? A cathedral, again, with lots and lots of columns in the center. And then, of course, the sort of thicker walls. You had to have all this buttressing on the inside or outside just to add all of these windows when you're doing things out of stone and masonry. Or the Robie House in Chicago. This is close to University of Chicago's campus. If my memory serves me correctly, it's been a long, long time since I've been here. But again, you can sort of read from the plan here, right? It's really good sort of figure ground, right? You can sort of really understand what's being cut and see all the walls. But you can see basically two volumes, right? Let's see. In both plans, the first floor and the ground floor plan. One volume, two volumes, right? Here's the sort of main part, here's the back part. Where they slam together, then you have things like circulation and that kind of stuff, right? So it's no surprise you have the circulation where the two sort of volumes can sort of both feed from them. Let's see. I highly recommend looking up these examples if you want to see what these things are. Robie House is a pretty famous Frank Lloyd Wright house. That's not in Oak Park. It's just south of the Loop. Let's see. I'm not sure why I have this in here. It looks like a pretty mundane plan. There's reflected ceiling plans. I mean, I'm not going to go into these things, plan details. Here's an elevation, right? And I included this because when you look at let's say the elevation I show you here in a minute in Revit, you can see that we're maybe one step away from having an elevation like this. It's already showing us all of the line work, and it's already projecting shadows. And really all we have to do is start to add some tone or some color or some textures in order to sort of show some materiality here to start to produce elevations like this, right? So here's another example of an elevation. I'm not fond of how they put these leaders on here. Typically in a drawing at school, we wouldn't necessarily add all of these elevation markers and start to add these things with leaders. But certainly in a construction document set, you definitely have some tags here and there, as well as all the key elevation markers and things like that, to sort of talk about the different materials, different finishes, or you might have a bubble here to sort of take you to another elevation to sort of show things in detail. All right, we have things like interior elevations. Again, that's not something that we typically work on too much in school, but you have to in a drawing set when you actually have to hand this thing off to somebody to build it. They need to understand where everything is on the inside. when I used to do, just as an aside, right? When I worked at MBBJ, for instance, that's a really large firm with offices worldwide. But my office, we did a lot of hospital projects and medical projects. When we would do something like a big project with a budget, like let's say had ICU rooms in it or something, intensive care unit rooms. What we would actually do, um, instead of just putting a bunch of interior elevations together and hoping everything works, we would actually build full-scale mock-up of a space with all the interior elevation information in it out of, let's say, foam core. We'd mock this up, and then we'd actually bring in some of the users, nurses and doctors, to then sort of point out where we need to start to adjust things. So these elevations then become really important, like, where do you put power sockets or air hookups, pneumatics, or, where are all of the sort of emergency fire poles and things like that, right? Or in a domestic space, where is the TV? Where are the built-ins and that kind of stuff, right? So uh, anyway, enough of that, right? You can sort of see that can begin to combine these things. And there's nothing stopping you from scribbling these things out with a pencil if you want to, right? Some of these things can be quite lovely even. But you can do quite long sections. In fact, there's beyond building section, there's site sections, city sections, etc. But you can see, I just wanted to show you a variety of these things, and I'll post this to Canvas. And of course, this video will also be posted soon after class. So, okay. This one's sort of a weird combination of like very specific, like, you have all these sort of elevations, tags. You have tags with leaders sort of talking about specific components or materials. You have hatches and things like that for concrete and soil and insulation and things like that. But then they've also like added these scale figures, and so it's kind of a wonky drawing, but you can have fun with these, right? Have fun. And particularly the drafts I'm asking you to do between now and Tuesday, have fun, try some new things. Don't be afraid to sort of take a risk, because this is the first draft, right, that you're doing. And again, here's a set of plans and then a section perspective, right? Okay. You can always take a section perspective or an elevation and then explode things out if you want, sort of show things in section. Here's a section again, but it's more of a collage. You can see that there's some existing buildings that it's neighbored up against, and then this guy is sort of this green for whatever reason. Yeah, right. Again, another set of sections. This is sort of a serial sections, right? Like, there's 1, 2, 3, 4 sort of sections being cut through this thing to sort of show the variety of how these things work throughout. Here's a blow up one, right? Section models, etc. All right, so I wanted to sort of talk about that because I wanted to sort of show that yesterday, and I just completely spaced that. Um, I've been a real space cadet this summer. It's been close to burnout here, but let me go ahead and open up Revit. I want to show you guys, and we'll go through the instructions while that's opening up. This is Canvas, the assignment, and I just sent this to you as well via email, Sully. So you have it. But the idea is to extract 3 plan drawings of your project, your current project at the moment, you can use Revit or you can use Rhino. I don't care either way. But then try bringing it into Illustrator or Photoshop and try to do a little post-processing. Add a little fun with these things. And then also, I want 2 building sections, one where you extract it from Revit and one where you extract it from Rhino. Rhino has to be a section perspective. Revit, you can actually do just a typical orthographic section, or you can do a section perspective from there as well. I want you to try both ways from both platforms. Again, you can bring those into Illustrator or Photoshop and begin to add some little scale figures or something, or some tone using the fill or the gradients. Try it out, right? They're not going to be perfect. And there'll be things for us to talk about, right? First drafts are never great. first drafts are the starting point for us to have a conversation about how to begin to really dial in on what the idea is, and then how you begin to adjust and shift your thinking when you start to re-extract these drawings from the model to really tell that story. All right, so you'll have 3 plan drawings in 2 sections. You'll compose these on a quick 24 by 36-inch poster in Adobe Illustrator, save it as a PDF, and upload it to Canvas. Okay. Yeah, so let me go ahead. I'll just open up this file I was showing the other day for some plans, right? And the section perspective. Interestingly, we actually tried to do a section perspective in Revit. It took a while to sort of figure things out, but once we did, it was quite easy. All right, so I'll show that here in this demonstration as well. All right, so you can see I'm just in one of the 3D views that I've created. Let's see. Let's go first to my plans, right? So here's my level 1 architectural floor plan, level 2 architectural floor plan, and then my level 3 architectural floor plan, which looks more like a roof plan, I think, at this point. I could be wrong. I don't remember, honestly, but I think it's just more of a roof plan. You can see that I actually added a few openings in the roof in some places over a porch. You can see that there's the trees and things above. You can see that I actually have a section being cut and that section cut's included. So again, just as a reminder, when we want to take, let's say, a drawing out of Revit, like one of these plans or sections or elevations, it's not too hard to do, but let me just quickly turn the sun on. Let's see. Shadows on. There we go. And let's do the sun settings. I'm just going to change this. Those are some pretty deep shadows. Let's see. There we go. Let's do something like that. There. I'll pick 2:10 p.m., whatever. All right. So maybe I want to actually have some of these shadows show up and let's see what happens when I actually export this out now. There's different ways I can export this. So let's take a look at some of them. We've done this before where we export it as a DWG. I'm just waiting on this to be less stupid here. Okay, great. Let's see, images and animation, save, walk through an image. Let's try this image. Let's see what happens when I export this as an image. Shaded views. Let's try PNG. And fit to 512 pixels horizontal. That seems really small to me. Fit to let's fit to 2000 pixels. Current window, view links. I just kind of want to see what this actually gives us. Output, multiple view sheets, well, blah, blah, blah. Let's change that. Let's put it in. What the heck? Here we go. Okay, sorry. My brain just does not want to work today. I'll say plan 01. This should be .png, right? So, and hit save. And I'll go ahead and hit OK. Let's see what I get out of that. Now, also simultaneously, I'm going to just go ahead and say File, Export, and I want to get this DWG format. That'll give me the vector drawing. Let's see here. Again, let's take a look. Solids, let's go SCSI solids. I just want to get in the habit of that. I'm just going to leave this the same. I don't really care. And I'll hit OK. Later on, we'll pay really attention. We'll pay close attention to units because we'll want to make sure that everything's to a certain scale. But for right now, I'm not too worried about it. And yeah, why not? I'll just go ahead and leave it at that. Okay, while that's going, I'm just going to open up Photoshop. So that PNG file that I first exported, I'm going to open that up in Photoshop and let's see if it preserved it, if it put a background on it or not. If not, great. We have something beautiful that we can actually add some tone and texture and color to quite easily, even underneath that shadow work and the line work. So I'm just kind of curious to sort of see what it gave me here. I know what Rhino gives me, and I can preserve that transparency, that alpha channel in the background, but kind of curious to see if Revit does the same thing. I hope it does. Be really nice if it did. "52 kilobytes. It's this tiny file. So it looks like I actually have a white background. What I was hoping is that I could import this in and start to actually use the fill tool or start to make shapes and then you know, still have the shadows and things like that underneath. But I could still potentially use this in Illustrator to get some shadows and things like that. So let me go ahead and open up Illustrator. Okay. So this is the first of 3 plans I would bring out from Revit, let's say, if I wanted to use Revit for the 3 floor plans. You might have more than sort of 4 or 3 floors to sort of show. That's fine. Pick the 3 most interesting sort of places to cut a plan. And then begin to bring those in and format them. So here's what I'm talking about when I say sort of, you know, you can be a little more expressive with these things instead of just using the line work solely from Revit or Rhino. You can begin to add some tone, shadows, and things like that. So let me first make a new Illustrator file. I'm going to go ahead and just remembering that I have to make a 24 by 36, right? So I'm just going to say 24 inches. Come on, inches. 24 by 36. I'm going to go, I guess, portrait. I don't know. Maybe I'll change that later. But I'm going to go ahead and hit create. So I'll start with the size poster that I want. I'm going to go ahead and place that DWG file that I created, right? That CAD file. There we are. And there it is. You can see that I actually included a graphic scale as well as a north arrow for us. That's nice. So there's several things I could begin to do here in Illustrator. One, I'm going to go ahead, just as I did before, I'm going to turn all the line work to black, and I'm going to beef it up just a little more so I can see it just a little easier. Okay, there we go. I'm going to, oops, I need to select everything. Look, when I select one thing, it selects everything, right? That tells me that I need to ungroup it. Silly Illustrator, DWG, PostScript things. I have to go back to object and say ungroup. And ungroup, maybe I have to ungroup it several times. Okay, now that it won't let me ungroup anymore. That tells me that there's nothing else to ungroup here. All right. I might just go ahead and get rid of these labels, but I might keep the grid lines there. Those are kind of nice. I might just lighten those up and change their line type, which is I have that, and sort of show that there's a sort of 9 square grid here as a sort of just zoom in on this so I can very carefully delete the parts away that I want. So I can show the sort of ordering system, the grid that I was using to sort of give order to this thing, right? In this case. There's lots of lines in there. Okay, great. So now you can see, I mean, when I read this, I go, okay, I've used the landscape architecture like trees to create an axis here. That's where I must enter. Now I can see that there's a set of spaces out here, and then there's a set of smaller rooms tucked away back behind, etc. Right? I can see that maybe I've defined some sort of outdoor courtyard over here with some trees or shrubs or something, etc. All right, maybe I'll probably change that in on the north arrow later. That just looks kind of clunky. I mean, I don't know who uses that font anymore, but I wouldn't, especially when the font over here is completely different. It drives me crazy, all the different typefaces sometimes. All right, so anyway, that's how you know I'm a snob. I'm like, stop using all the different typefaces. Just pick one really good one and just use it. All right, so here we go. There's nothing stopping us from also placing, let's place that PNG file and see what we have there. Let's see, there it is, plan.png. I'm gonna go ahead and place it. It might be really large or really small, I don't know. And again, if I go over to the right-hand side, there's a set of, you see these 2 sheets sort of layered on top of each other? That's a layers box. If I want to create a new layer, I go down to the bottom, I say create new layer with a plus sign. I'm just going to drag this new layer, layer 2 down. I click and drag it. The layer, sort of the order that these are in, or the order that they sort of show as overlays on screen, right? So in this case, layer 1 will show up over layer 2 because I've moved layer 1 on top of layer 2 in the sort of hierarchy here in my layer list. I'm going to go ahead and select this image, and then it says the thing that's selected right now on my screen. This box, this little blue box says it's in layer 1. I can drag it over to layer 2 and switch it over to layer 2. All right, now I can take all the line work from layer 1 and lock it, and then layer 2, so I don't accidentally select something and drag it or something. And now I can take the image in layer 2 and I can resize it. Let's fit it to this thing. I'm going to use it as an underlay, and maybe I'll even turn down its transparency just so we get some of those shadows, but they'll be really light, very subtle. Looks like I might have just lucked out and gotten that pretty close. Let's see here. Not quite though. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and turn its transparency down so I can sort of see it against. There we go. Let's try that. Let's move that in position. Oh, that's so close. Yeah. And so again, I'm just going to turn the transparency down even further. I don't want the shadows to be too strong, right? But now I have those shadows and the line work, right? So in this line work, I could actually add tone and poche. I could beef up line weights where I need to or want to. And then look, I have these layers. I can lock this one. I can create a new one in between, right? Layer 3 that's in between layer 1 and layer 2. And I can start to draw. Let me draw. I'm going to go up to this tool over here in the left-hand toolbar and draw a rectangle. And I'm going to tell it I want a fill color. I want a fill color of, let's say, gray. Maybe not gray, but I can always change it afterwards, right? And I'm just going to, let's see here. Maybe I'll just add a rectangle here and maybe highlight this room. Right, I don't know why it's doing a gradient. That's not what I last asked for. There we go. What in the world? Cut it out. What is this gradient? Here we go. Sorry. It must be. Must be not quite there yet. Okay, there we go. And of course, we could always turn its transparency down as well. Or if we don't like that, I could always color code this thing or start to add textures and tones. I could always move that layer down underneath this one, right? Maybe I start to add a little bit of warm tone to this. So it's not just a gray, but maybe it's a, right. Or maybe I could add a texture, right? So you can begin to play around with these things. Later on, when we start talking about Photoshop, we'll start talking about how you can add overlay layers with textures and start to add grit and other sorts of things to these things. But you can begin to lay things up. Maybe it's about pointing out like this is a sort of a room, this is a particular room, right? Maybe I'm starting to diagram portions of the program by color. Or maybe I'm just trying to sort of start a conversation about how these different tones or materials on the ground on the floor or something like that, right? So again, you can have fun, but again, don't belabor this. Try and save iteratively if you want. You can show me, different versions if you want, right? I mean, this is a chance for you to experiment and have fun. Um, One thing I would say, you could always sort of add some sort of tone or value to the inside and then leave the outside without any tone. So then you can sort of figure out what's interior space or exterior space, or you could do the opposite, right? If I start to add some tone to the outside and even add maybe green or something to the trees and things like that. You don't want to go too wild with that, I would say, because what you don't want is to sort of make all the greenery be the sort of visual emphasis, probably. But but you can always have fun with this and try new things, see what happens, okay? Again, this is your chance to explore, right? Remember, the mantra of this course is fail early, fail often, right? If you're trying something new and you're trying your best, I will never penalize you for screwing something up, right? For trying something and it just didn't quite work out the way you wanted. That's not a big deal, right? Certainly not a big deal to me. One thing you'll notice here is that the PNG still had the sort of north arrow in this scale and things like that over here. Just as we went over when we were talking about the site diagramming and the diagrams of place in downtown Las Vegas and studio, if I wanted to get rid of that stuff, Illustrator isn't an image, like a raster image editor. So I could either bring this into Photoshop and crop it first and then bring it back in, or I could just simply make a mask for this. So I'll just do a mask. Let's see. Let me just figure this out here. Let me lock this layer and lock this layer. And now I have this one, right? Which is just the PNG. And what I'm going to do is on that same layer, I'm just going to draw a window around the part of the image that I actually want. Okay. So now I have my image and I have this box, which is basically a mask, a window around the image showing just the parts of the image I want to see. And I can say object, clippy mask make. Right now, that orange box I drew is just there. Only Illustrator knows it's there, and it's basically just a mask outline delineating which parts of the image I want to see from beyond. That's how you use clipping masks in Illustrator. All right. You know what really bugs me? This little bit of green in that north arrow. Oh, or no, it's cyan. Oof. Why cyan? All right. Let's take care of this once and for all. There we are. It's a gift and a curse to be that attentive to details. Oh, look at this, right? We missed a little elevation marker down here in the PNG. Aha. So if I go back to that PNG, right, and select it, and I double click, you can see that I still have the PNG, and it's called, I'm inside the clip group, and it remembers that shape. And I can select that shape and just change it a little bit to cut that part out. Cut that part out again. Oh yeah. Now we're cooking. All right, now I can double click and get out of it. Nice. So it can begin to edit these things non-destructively. All right. Let's talk quickly about how we might make a section perspective in Revit. And then I'll talk a little bit about Rhino, and we can again play around in this. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the plan. I'm in plan number 1, and I'm just going to go to architecture. No. Sorry, view tab here in my interface. Right, here's where we can create a new 3D view. We can also create section cuts. All right, so I'm going to create a new 3D view. So I'm going to go click on the arrow down and get a camera. And let's say I want to view through here. I'm going to go ahead and set up a perspective there. Oh yeah, there's my 3D view, my new 3D view. So a couple of things here. One, I'm gonna definitely make it so I can see much more of this perspective here. And that's crazy how much it's cutting off, how it's cropped. Okay. All right. And now, and one other thing, right? I think here, while I'm still in this view and I haven't selected anything else, I have the view options, right? It says 3D view. And under the options and the extents, there's something called a section box that I can toggle on and hit apply. Now you'll see that the new box pops up. It's this gray one. And if I select it, come on. Let me select the section box, you stupid. There we go. I've selected that section box. And I can go to, I think, yeah, level 1 with that box selected. And I can change that section box. right? Go back to my 3D view. And now I'm seeing a section perspective. Okay. Let me zoom in here, right? So that's one way you could begin to get a section perspective in Revit. Again, I can export this out in any number of ways. I don't have shadows turned on. I could turn them on, right? And then from there, I could bring this in an Illustrator or Photoshop, begin to add some tone, texture, some little scaled figures, things like that, if I want to, right? Okay. Yeah, there we go. So here I'm cutting through a window wall, an outdoor space that's covered with a shaded, partially shaded roof, like a sort of a trellis, some sort of trellis with of sort of, thicker beams maybe. And then I see a sort of double high space that pulls back, so it never actually touches the window wall. So you have a sort of double height space here. I can see this outdoor space where I would enter, and then back beyond an elevation, I can see or in perspective, I can see the sort of double height space over here, right? And if I wanted to go back and I can change where I'm cutting this thing. Let's cut through here instead. Go back to this. Might have to zoom in. Right now I can see my window and then the sort of crazy steel um, frame that I made, the sill. I can see wall, roof, wall. I can see the sort of mezzanine overlooking or loft overlooking a sort of double high living room space with this part of the stairway, but it's actually being cut section, right? Okay, so that's how you can begin to, again, bring this out. And from here, right, I can, oops, sorry, wrong file pull down. Let's see, here we go. File pull down, I could export an image, I could export a CAD format, I could do both DWG and a PNG, try to composite them together if I'd like, pick and choose with things I like the best. Let me just quickly do that. You know what, I'm just gonna do the PNG really quickly. And I'll show a couple things in Photoshop. Again, you have your options here to do what you want. Desktop, I'll call this section 01 and hit OK. Here's some Photoshop. Let's open that up. Even as a PNG, it's still going to have a white background, I think. Yeah. But here, look, first of all, let's talk a little bit about one of the conventions section that Revit doesn't really do a lot of, and that is we want to have ground. We want to have that ground line. We never just have something floating in space, right? That's a huge no-no. For elevations and sections, you want to make sure that you add that line and poche. So let's first of all, let's decide what kind of poche or color that we want. So I'm going to pick black. I'm just going to get this paint bucket, paint fill. I'm just going to start to fill this in. I just want to make sure that everybody knows what's actually being cut here. Oh yeah, look at that. That worked really nice, right? That's being cut. Ta-da. All right, I'm just going to maybe zoom in on that windowsill. If there's any daylight in between pixels there, right? Technically, this is a pane of glass being cut in section, so it should be black. This is a steel plating that should be, it's being cut, so it should be filled in if necessary. All right. So from here, what I'd probably do next is go to my rectangular selection tool. Right. And I'm just going to fill in inside of that also black. I'm going to make ground. I'm going to make earth. I'm going to create a nice base for this drawing to sit on. All right. And of course, the other thing I can do here is I can say, well, sorry, the ratio is set to 1 to 1 to 1. Let's see, original ratio and come on. No constraints. Let's see. Unconstrained. I'm just going to crop this. Right. I'll leave a little bit of sky, but I don't need more sky than I have ground. So I'll just do that, right? Now suddenly I have something I can save and bring into Illustrator and compose with everything else, right? Okay. So again, you can take some artistic liberty license here. Um, just as we were doing this in Revit, I could easily make some clipping planes and in Rhino, like I showed before. Let's see here. And I'm asking you to actually do a section perspective in Rhino using a clipping plane. But I'll just really quickly go through this. Let's take this one, why not? Just waiting for this to load up. Let's see here. Again, just waiting. Waiting. This has slowed things down. Let's see. All right, here we go. About time, Rhino. Come on. I swear, I think Rhino took longer than Revit, which is just incomprehensible to me at this point. I don't know how Rhino got so bloated. Used to be really light. All right. So a couple of things here to sort of again remember. These are details that aren't necessarily obvious. We talked about clipping planes. Let's see here. What do we have going? Come on, Rhino, load up. Just waiting on it. But we're going to do a couple of things here. One is we're going to make sure I'll just redo a clipping plane. I'll position it. I'll make sure it's flipped the right direction. I'll apply it to the right view. Um, and then from there, we'll turn on sun and shadows. We'll double check the, I don't know what that is. Come on, Windows. Oh, yeah. And let's see, from there, you can see all the trending searches. And I guess there's a hurricane somewhere. It's pretty early for hurricane season. Anyway, sun, light, and we can even add some tone or something if we want. The section perspectives, but these section perspectives and sections and plans, they'll be the baseline for things that we can do. We'll go over more in the following weeks on how we can begin to collage things in Photoshop and Illustrator. So I think it's really important. But we'll also adjust some of the camera settings and things like that. So let me just quickly, let's change all of these to shaded. Come on. Yeah, no, shaded. Cut it out, Rhino. All right. I think this is a clipping plane. It sure is. Look at that. I'm just going to go ahead and delete it, right? You can have multiple clipping planes. You can keep them on layers and turn them on or off if you want. And again, we'll talk about that in a minute. Let's add a clipping plane. Clipping plane. First corner of clipping plane. So here's where you really want to make sure that you understand which orientation, which you're clipping plane, and you're going to be drawing a plane from one corner to the other. So let's say I want to draw a longitudinal section, right, through the length of this. Then maybe I come to front view and I'll draw it there instead of the transverse like I had before. There's my section. There we go. There's its gumball. Now, something to remember here is that, let me just move this out of the way. If I go to my properties, it's that color wheel, right? And you can see I have just general geometric properties, but I also have, when I have my clipping plane selected, I have clipping plane properties. And one of the things I can do is I can say, which views do I actually want to apply the clipping plane to, right? So in this case, I have to turn on perspective, and then suddenly I have my clipping plane cutting through this thing. Right. Here we go. So there's a nice long longitudinal section through this thing. Let's try that. Okay. Another thing to remember, right? If I'm in here, let's say in perspective view, and I don't have anything else selected. If I go to properties, I have my viewport properties. By default, lens length is set to 50 millimeter, which I think is ridiculous. I actually have a 50 millimeter lens. It's quite zoomed in. You can't zoom out. It's terrible. Standard industry standard 35 millimeter. To sort of maybe better approximate human vision, 28 millimeter. So wider angle that does a better job, right? So you can see things in perspective a little easier. I'm gonna maybe 28, maybe I'll go 25 just to get a little more of this perspective here. We'll see. And maybe I'll just use this and zoom in on just the part that I want. Move this part of the zoom over. Right. And then from here, it's just a matter of sort of, again, maybe I'll turn on rendered mode and see what that looks like. Let's see. This will give me some soft shadows from just a diffuse sky dome, right? So like, let's say it was just an completely overcast day. You're just getting light scattered from the sky. It's not directional, like directly from the sun. So let's see what this, I don't know why this is taking so long, but I just want to maybe after that turn on the sun and let's see what we have. So clipping plane is actually giving us the outline of the stuff that we need. I can always select that clipping plane and just hide it really quickly so I don't see the actual line work there. I'm not so happy with the rendered mode. Let's go through some of these things and see what happens. Let's try Arctic. Try Arctic. Let's see what that looks like. Arctic actually looks much better already and a little more responsive. What I'm going to do is again, I can type in sun as a command, right? I actually have it now as a tab over here that I can toggle on and off, along with layers and properties. I can toggle on the sun. I can turn the sun on or off. And I can tell it exactly where I'm located, Las Vegas. And I can give it a particular time of day. And it doesn't look like I actually have sort of crisp shadows turned on. Let's see here. I wonder if that's an Arctic mode setting. So maybe instead of Arctic mode, I'm going to pick. Remember the some of the display port viewport modes that we picked or that we created ourselves, customized. Maybe I'll pick 767 demo. Ah, there we go. Now I'm starting to see shadows in a much clearer way. I can turn the intensity of that sun up or down depending on what I want. Okay. And I can turn it on at different times of the day. So maybe I'm trying to highlight a particular moment and section, right? But again, this is how you can begin to play around again with shade and lighting, and then create a section perspective and bring it out. This is not nearly as developed as the project I had open in Revit. And again, when I'm ready, I can just say viewport capture to file, transparent background, set the scale maybe twice as much, so it's a decent size image. Make sure I'm saving a PNG file, right? See where I'm saving it. I'll save it to the desktop. Why not? And once again, I can bring this into, along with all my other drawings, eventually get it into Illustrator if I, use Photoshop first or something. Let's see. File. Sorry, my laptop's really lagging here. Let's see. Okay. file place. And here we go. This is obviously a different project, and wow, that's ridiculously large, but from here I would probably clean some things up. Maybe I would have brought this into Photoshop first. You can see that I have ground here. It's being cut through, but it's not really clear what kind of poche I have here. There should be a way to actually change those settings in Rhino with the clipping plane, but I believe they're right here. In fact, when you actually have the clipping plane selected, cell clipping plane. Okay, sorry, I hit it. Let's see. So to unhide something, you go edit, visibility, show. Cell clipping plane. All right. So I have that added to selection. I can go to its properties. Section style. I can say custom, I believe. And like I should be able to give it like, let's say a solid or a hatch fill. Not by object, I just want all it to be solid black. Boundaries. Again, you can sort of say, I just want all black lines. Give it a scale, line type, continuous, thickness, pattern, width, round. But for whatever reason, it's not showing me custom. Let's see here. For whatever reason, it's not really updating to that. I don't understand why. It sounds like I just need to go through and there's a way to Google this, like seems like they've revamped the clipping plane tools for version 8. There's probably an instructable showing how all this stuff works. I just haven't had a chance to really look through it yet. It's nice that they have that, but it'd be nicer if it actually worked when you wanted it to. It seems fairly intuitive. I just don't understand why it's not working, or if you have to have it in a certain display mode. Well, anyway, we're only one step away, honestly, from bringing that into Photoshop and doing the same thing, similar to what we did with the version from Revit, right? Using the paint bucket tool and filling things in as we want, adding tone with brushes, etc. Right? And we'll talk a lot more about Photoshop when we come back from the 4th of July weekend. Okay. All right. So at this point here in Illustrator, where'd the Illustrator go? There it is. I'd be arranging 2 different sections in 3 different plans in a 24 by 36. So maybe these have to get smaller and sort of try to arrange them the best I can. And again, go ahead and upload those this poster as a PDF. Maybe you need to go wide. Maybe it's 36 wide, 24 inches tall. It's up to you. I just say 24 by 36 is pretty common size. But go ahead and upload it, and we'll have a conversation about each of them. Okay, about what's more successful, what's less successful, and figure out where we need to troubleshoot some things. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.